Hi, I'm Dr. Keith Johnson, and I'm reading from my book, If Life is a Grocery Store, I Need Better Coupons. And I'm reading from the article, Sometimes We Must Grieve and Learn. Get my glasses here. I was sitting having coffee with a friend of mine in a local restaurant. Discussion was light, mostly I was listening to ramblings. And since I was so familiar with this person, I didn't think much of sitting and half listening, watching the busy ongoings of the eating place, when suddenly she burst into tears. She'd lost someone very dear to her, a daughter in fact, and although her persona seemed to be enduring the loss very successfully, suddenly she was uncontrollably crying. I surmised that she had cried many times, and this was only a moment in many. She needed to cry. She was facing a great tragedy in her life, one she'd never been able to recoup. I could only be there at that moment, offering what I would hope to be a comforting presence. She cried. I waited. And it was while I waited for her to collect her composure that it dawned on me how callous, how unempathetic I had been to her emotional dilemma. Talking with me, coughing with me in a normal tone, I had not realized that she was facing an emotional crisis every moment of her life there, keeping up a good front, even though I'd been told that her daughter had recently died. It was a wake-up call for me at that meeting, as I began to understand that although I had already spent a couple of hours with the individual, I had failed to detect her inner anxiety or the crisis emotionally she was facing. And I began to wonder how many others I had encountered that day whom I had given ignorance to their feelings and anxieties, probably because I was too lost in my own world and not paying attention to theirs. You know, each of us holds great tragedy inside at some moment. All of us face some pain that is greater than the others, one that we reenact time and time again in our mind, often reliving the pain and trying to overcome the heartache. It is an ache we cannot overcome, no matter how far we bury it, no matter how much we try to ignore and live normally, but the tragedy does not allow the normalness of living, and it must therefore be endured. And it affects us. No matter how skilled we are able to ignore it, or at least appear to the rest of the world like we've ignored and overcome it, although in reality we haven't. And it affects our personality, the way we think, and how we treat our loved ones as well as ourselves. I received a note not too long ago from a parent whose child I tried to help. The note said, "Thank you for being there." Well, I thought, you know, that's all I was, there. I couldn't do much physically, but I'd learned to graduate school, be there, be silent, and listen. For me, listening is often the easiest part of my obligation. For some, listening is the hardest part, thereby intensifying their own tragedy. I believe God is there, and the greatest courtesy He shows us is He listens. We need to follow His example. We cannot, nor should we, short-circuit the human process. We must cry. We must take time to emotionally accept the experience of whatever tragedy we face and allow whatever lessons it gives us to become a part of our life. Often, a process is never quite completed that makes us who we are. What we cannot do is let the tragedy overcome us and become the obsession of our life. Like the mother who permanently lost her daughter, I suggested, isn't it better to rejoice in the experience that you had, whatever time and memory she brings, than to have never had her at all? Don't let the pain take all of that joy away. That's so easy to say and so difficult to do. Grief, after a tragedy, must be endured. It must be accepted, and it cannot take over. I know when the tragedy is brought to my attention that there's no way I can overcome the plague. I cannot erase our world of its own principles of pain and injustice and death, but I am able to facilitate and cries. I can even feel the pain and weep with them, and perhaps the greatest wisdom is found in the weeping of our tears. Demonstrates how much we understand right. We communicate our pain, justice, and our own development. The wisdom of the ages tells us this doesn't exist, but it does. And somehow, all of creation mourns with us. Words speak when words cannot. If I miss my father, I cry, and I feel he might even hear me. But my heart has told me what my brain cannot say, been shed in a tear. Funeral, I have not been able to voice my soul, but my tears can. When a mother cries over her lost child, ones, or a wife cannot get through to her husband, I can cry. And that tear is brought to heaven and placed at the golden throne, where the Heavenly Father interprets the message of my heart. Every tear is a prayer for hope. We have no relief until we have found meaning to our grief, a resolve to an unsolvable problem, a healing in our outburst of emotion. And we are not meant to hold it in or to hide it. Our lives are not perfect. We make mistakes, many worth crying over. Others make mistakes and hurt us, creating sorrow within our own heart. Nothing is clear and little is comfortable. We cannot see God, so we cannot understand the mysteries of the created universe. Our faith can only reach so far, and there is always the element of unclearness, no matter how strong our theology or how often our church attendance. And perhaps one of the great mysteries of the universe is that the outcome of the tragedy we face must be determined by those of us who face it. We can scream and be hateful. We can also scream and be forgiven. In either case, we are allowed to scream, and then we must go on. Such is life. One thing seems certain. In the unclearness of life, the certainty seems to finally rest in us and how we react. We cannot avoid nor leave. We certainly have the right to determine what affects us, and meanwhile, God remains silent and listens and weeps with us. But faith, the substance of things hoped, the evidence of things not seen. Thank you for your time.